Hi, my name is Aaron, this is my show Reeducation, and today we're going to talk about the Canadian Trucker Freedom Rally. So without any further ado, let's get into it. So the Canadian Trucker Freedom Rally is a very controversial demonstration that's been going on for the last couple of weeks or so, and it basically involves a whole lot of truckers, semi-truck drivers, all getting together and protesting the government, specifically their mandates on COVID-19, essentially saying that they don't want to be forced to put vaccines or any other thing that the government wants them to put in their bodies into their bodies. Now, obviously, a lot of controversy comes into play when we're talking about the government mandating putting vaccines in people's bodies against their will. Obviously, a lot of people think that taking the vaccine is a good idea. I happen to be one of them. But there are a small minority of people who don't want to take the vaccine and don't think that the government should be forcing them to take one. Now, the whole conversation about the government forcing people to take a vaccine versus people, wanting to take the vaccine because they're given proper information is something that I have touched on in the past, but I guess I'll have to reiterate it a little bit here right now so you kind of understand my position on the whole thing. As far as I'm concerned, you should, shocker, get the vaccine. It's the only real way that you can prevent against getting COVID-19, the global pandemic that's shut down basically the entire world for the last couple of years. It's probably a good idea to do whatever you can to make sure that you don't contract such a virus. You should be putting on your mask no matter what the government tells you should or shouldn't do. You should be making sure that you wash your hands and don't cough on people or breathe moistly on them. Obviously, these are measures that we've been taking personally for the last 2 or 3 years now, and it's kind of become the new normal. But there is a small number of people who believe that the vaccines themselves are actually more dangerous than the virus, which isn't what I believe, and I'm trying really hard right now to say something that isn't entirely rude about that, because if you have nothing nice to say, you should say nothing at all. But obviously, I don't believe that that's rooted in fact. But the fact remains that there are still a number of people that believe that. In Canada specifically, I think it's something like 90 or 95% of the population currently has the vaccine, has 3 vaccines in fact, and there is only a very small percentage of the population that is refusing to still get it. Now, as an anarchist, as an anarcho-communist to be specific, do I believe that it's a good idea that the government forces people to put something in their body against their will? No. But I have to also say that collective responsibility goes hand in hand with individual freedom. You really can't have one without the other. So to maintain your individual freedom, you kind of have to stay alive. I mean, there's really no point in giving dead bodies freedom because they're not really going to do much with it. So to maintain your individual freedom, you have to have a certain amount of collective responsibility. And it is, for the most part, our collective responsibility to make sure that we do get vaccinated and make sure that we do prevent any possible way of this virus spreading. Does that mean that the government should go in and force people to get vaccines? Personally, I believe no. I believe that if we were given the proper information and all of the things that we hear about this COVID-19 virus wasn't politicized and weaponized to basically gain certain individuals more power or more money, then we would be more likely to trust the scientific evidence that says that we should get vaccinated. Just like most things, if you tell people the truth about them, then they're more likely to take the proper precautions. I mean, this isn't like rocket science here. This is just like basic understanding of how human behavior works. If you don't lie to people, they will probably make a better decision than if you do lie to them, because they're not getting the proper information. So as an anarcho-communist, I am against mandating people be forced to do certain things with their bodies. Instead, I believe that they should be convinced through reason, logic, evidence, and the truth that doing those things is the right and proper way to go about them. But I can already sense that in the comment section, there are a certain number of people that are jumping in and saying, yeah, but that's in a perfect world. What would we have done about it in this specific situation? And I personally don't think that I should answer that question, because the hierarchical capitalist system is the one that created this mess in the first place. If we had have had a proper system with, proper measures in place to take care of our people, we would have planned for this long ago, and we wouldn't have politicized it in such a way that makes people make the wrong decisions. In any case, trying to come up with a capitalist solution to capitalism's problem in this video is a little bit outside of the scope of what I want to talk about here today. Basically, my whole position on this is that I'm anti-mandate, though I am pro-education and making sure that people do the right thing. So, anti-mandate, pro-vaccination. It's kind of sad that I have to make that caveat though, so that people on the left are actually on board with what I'm saying. If you have a different opinion, obviously leave a comment in the comment section down below. Maybe I'm wrong about this. Maybe there is an anti-capitalist, anti-authoritarian way that we can talk about mandating vaccinations that I haven't thought about yet. And I totally believe that that's a possibility. So tell me down there. Tell me in the basement, downstairs. Go downstairs, tell me from the basement. I don't know what I'm fucking talking about. So circling around back to the Canadian Trucker Freedom Rally, what exactly is it? Well, I think that it's basically the culmination of a lot of people being very frustrated with the way that the government and big business and everything else has handled the COVID-19 pandemic, and they're angry. They're basically lashing out, and they're trying to find outlets to which they can actually lash out into, and this happens to be one that they've tried a while ago that kind of worked, so they're trying to basically do it again. Canadian Trucker Freedom Convoy things have kind of been a reoccurring idea over the last couple of years. So obviously the idea of using the convoy as a method of protest in this specific instance, was kind of a no-brainer. It basically fell right into place. The problem, though, is that almost all of the propaganda surrounding this whole Canadian Freedom Trucker Rally thing, I'm going to continue to say that wrong, is that it's mostly, if not entirely, based in conservative and right-wing ideals. The Canadian right wing has latched onto this movement full force, and they've been using all sorts of methods to push their right-wing and sometimes outwardly white nationalist agendas, and essentially use these freedom rallies as a way to indoctrinate people and encompass them into this whole right-wing ultra-nationalistic view that has been plaguing basically the entire world for the last few years or so. A lot of the Trucker Freedom Rally actually birthed itself out of most of the American right-wing propaganda that was going on for the last few years as well, and it's kind of a direct Canadian reflection of the January 6th insurrection. I hesitate on calling it that, because it was more like a bunch of right-wing nut jobs tripping over their own dicks directly into the American government buildings, which they were kind of just let into in the first place, and the police just opened up the doors to a lot of them, and a lot of the police were on their side, and if this had been any other group than right-wing white boomers, then this probably would have resulted in mass slaughter and probably public executions. But I digress. The Canadian version of this, the right-wing trucker rally, is somewhat of a reflection of what happened there. Their ideals are kind of the same, minus full-on support of Donald Trump, which don't get me started. There is definitely Trump supporters within that group. But it morphed and metastasized itself in its own little Canadian way and turned into what it is today. So at one point, these people, these protesters, a lot of them anyway, were legitimately concerned with a lot of real-world problems that they were facing because of the COVID-19 pandemic and all of the ridiculous security theater that was put into place by the government in Canada to make us seem like we were being more safe while more and more people were seeing that they really weren't that much more safe. Like, for instance, when you go into a restaurant and have to wear your mask when you walk through the door, but when you sit at a table literally 4 feet from the door, you can take your mask back off to eat. Or when you go to the cashier, when you're inside of a grocery store or any department store, and you have to talk to them through the plastic shield, but then when you go to actually swipe your card, you go around the shield so they can hand you the swiper. That doesn't tend to make much sense. Now, some of these grievances are completely ridiculous, and some of them kind of make a little bit of sense. It reminds me a little bit of the security theater that we instituted during 9/11 and, quickly thereafter, when the Patriot Act was introduced and all of the security got ramped up inside of airplanes. There's a lot of information that suggests that when they ramped up security within those airports, it didn't do a whole lot to stop terrorism from happening in the world. It basically just created a bunch of security theater that made people believe that they were taking care of terrorism and that they were somehow safer. When in fact, most of those legislations and most of those things that were put in place took away people's freedom and made it harder for them to travel overseas or to do much of anything at all. Now, is some of that happening here with COVID? Abso-fucking-lutely yes. But are some of the measures being taken completely necessary? Absolutely yes. Washing your hands, wearing a mask, getting a vaccine, those actually do help. But having to contact trace every single person that lives within the society and finding out exactly where they are at what point in time and who they're interacting with, well, I think that I can see how that might be used against us. Every time you give any sort of power structure or ruling class that kind of ability to control their population, it's very rare that those measures ever get taken away. Look at the Patriot Act, for example. It's over 20 years. 20 years? It's about 20 years out from 9/11, and we still see all of the same problems with our security, with our loss of freedom from things like the Patriot Act today. And I understand that a lot of leftists have a hard time talking about any of this because the second that you do, everybody and their mother thinks that you're saying, oh, don't get a vaccine, or oh, don't wear masks. Like, we need to make that unreasonable logical jump from, hey, I think that government overreach might be a little bit concerning, to this person is a conspiracy theorist and they don't think that the science works, is a Twitter level leap that I think is unnecessary. So much so that I believe that it kills arguments the second that they're made and makes it impossible for people to actually say how they believe and say what they actually think about a lot of these measures. But that makes a lot of sense because there is an enormous amount of money being spent on both sides to politicize and propagandize and separate people on this issue. And there is an outrageous amount of money being spent from the right to convince people that not only should they be questioning the government, but they should be unequivocally and blindly believing every single thing that a conservative pundit might say, or that any right-winger might say, and that allows them to basically split that little group even further and force those people who would otherwise just be regular little old lady grandmothers, or your weird uncle who listens to Joe Rogan on the weekends, and turns them into far-right extremist nationalists. That is because we are very much in end-stage capitalism. And the antibodies that is used to protect that fledgling capitalism is right-wing, extremist, nationalist, and even fascist elements. And the more people that you can convince of fascism and nationalism, the better. Because then they don't have to actually think critically about the system that they're in. They only have to demonize the other. Which is exactly what's going on here. Just think of what the political pundits have been saying to the right-wingers all along about this whole situation. That it's socialism and communism, and Joe Biden and Justin Trudeau are radical Marxist-Leninist socialists trying to take away your freedom and force you to do that. And they're not even talking about the real world. They don't tell you what socialism or communism actually is. They just equate it with liberalism and the culture war. And when it's done that way, it just works to divide people. The conservatives see absolutely no difference between liberal ideas and communist ideas. And it's meant to be that way because they have to demonize anything that might actually bring us all together and solidify us as a unified group of disaffected workers completely pissed off at the government, the state, and the system in general, and who want to actually work towards change. Now, the majority of these protesters, the actual protesters in the streets, aren't actually truckers. Some of them are, but a lot of them are just business owners, petty bourgeoisie, or actual members of fascist and neo-Nazi organizations. There are direct ties from the leadership to the Ku Klux Klan. But I want to stress that that doesn't mean that every single person that's joining up with this freedom protest is necessarily a fascist, a nationalist, or a Nazi. Personally, I believe that if you allow Nazis or fascists into your group, then that turns that entire group into a Nazi group. But I digress. The concerns that a lot of the regular people that aren't Nazis might have are based in something legitimate. And if we're able to give socialistic solutions to a lot of those actual systemic problems, then we can stop anybody who isn't a Nazi or isn't a fascist or isn't a right-winger at all from seeing that protest as anything beneficial and, shepherd those people towards doing something that actually matters. Direct action, mutual aid, things that actually might change the system in a real systemic way. Now, I'm from Canada, and I'm from an extremely right-wing part of Canada, and I've seen a ton of people who otherwise are not those things. They're not evil Nazis or fascists. Look at a lot of this protest as being kind of a good thing. Not all of them have enlightened leftist morality or any sort of idea on why this is happening or how it came to be or what the actual problems are, but they do know that there are problems. And a lot of them do feel that within their families, their communities, and even, in their pocketbooks, things aren't looking so good. So they want to do something to stop this incredible problem that's happening. And a lot of them are confused on what to actually do about it. So when they visibly see a bunch of people that are fighting against the system, and those people somewhat getting concessions from that system, they tend to actually think that it might be beneficial to them, even when it really, really isn't. Now, the thing is, throughout history, is that we've never really had full control over who rises up to the top and takes control over mass discontent. Sometimes it's the right, sometimes it's the left, sometimes it's the center. And we as leftists have to do whatever we possibly can to move the popular consensus away from those toxic, terrible, and corrosive elements of fascism, nationalism, and conspiracy theories towards something that can actually benefit the people and make real systemic change in the real world. It doesn't matter if the right wing started the protests or if the left wing started the protests or the bourgeois started the protests. We have to find a way to finish them. We have to find a way to capture that energy and use it towards things that'll actually be beneficial. Because if we don't, if we allow the fascists and the Nazis and the right-wingers to take control of every movement and every bit of discontent that the people feel, then they are going to take control of the entire system. And that's exactly what the ruling class and the big money interests want to have happen. Again, these fascist elements, these nationalistic elements, are nothing more than the antibodies of capitalism, fighting against real worker discontent and real worker solidarity to divide the people and make it so that those people fight one another instead of fighting the ruling class. Now, and I want to make it very clear that working together with the people, with the workers themselves, doesn't mean aligning ourselves with Nazis, fascists, or right-wing, neo-nationalist, conspiracy theorist, white supremacists. It means working with average people, your neighbor, your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, your coworkers and colleagues, like I always say, to try to create community to build a better world. The problem is that the average Canadian worker, not just the truckers, but the entire workforce in general isn't against necessarily the mandates themselves. It's against everything else that caused these problems. All of the real systemic things that make it harder for you to live. Rising prices, inflation, job loss, the lack of proper medical care or pharmacare, vanishing pensions, the ability for people to actually work a single job and pay their rent at the same time. Having a family where not everybody is worked to death. The idea of eventually owning your own home. All of these things are what's really plaguing the Canadian and American people right now. And these are the actual systemic problems that can be fixed if everybody isn't focusing on something that generally won't actually do anything at all. They can march on Trudeau and burst into the Capitol building and demand that they destroy the mandates and all of these things. But then when did the teachers get paid more? When do we hire more doctors? When do we start making sure that people can afford food, clothing, shelter, and not end up homeless in a system that has absolutely no desire to actually help you out? When do we actually create the world that we want to see? When do we actually do something that makes a real difference and actually changes the way that the system actually holds us down? Never, really, if we continue to follow the right-wing propaganda, if we continue to follow the lead of the government and the state, if we continue to listen to these hierarchical forces that have been holding us down this entire time, they're going to convince us every single time that we should never work together, and we should never fight for something that would equally benefit all of us. They will always convince us to fight for the thing that gains them more power, them more money, them more control. And nothing for you. You are nothing to them. And that's why a lot of these right-wing pundits and these nationalist groups that have been propagandizing to these Freedom Rally people this entire time have been demonizing socialism and communism so heavily. Because they know that if people, the working people, actually hear real solutions to their real problems, they'll fight for them. And they'll win. So it should be up to us to give them those solutions. And to teach the regular people within our lives, people that might be sympathetic to this entire idea, that there is a real way forward. And it's together, not divided. At least, that's the way I look at it. If you do get a chance, please check out all the links in the description box below. And as always, keep evolving. Oh, by the way, I tried to do a little bit of a return to form here in, Season 4 of the Re-Education program. I got my old shirt back with a bit of a different pin. Kind of cool. Obviously, I haven't been putting out a lot of videos lately. It's been really touch and go. As far as creating content is concerned since the beginning of this year. And I really want to apologize to all my patrons and everybody who looks forward to actually watching these videos. I honestly have been going through a lot in my personal life right now, and trying to force myself to be creative in this moment has been incredibly difficult. I honestly haven't felt this much burnout in years. And it's due to a lot of things that are going on in my real life. I've been dedicating a lot more of my time to real world direct action. Follow my Twitter, linked in the description box below downstairs, to follow some of the work that I do there. And that's been really beneficial to a lot of people. But at the same time, a lot of those things have been affecting me genuinely, I should say. And it's been harder and harder to look at the problems in the system, see all of these really upsetting things that are going on right now, and be able to come out here and be jokey and laughy and upbeat, when really all I want to do after is crawl into a closet and turn off the lights and cry. That isn't to say that I think that people shouldn't go out and do direct action. You absolutely should. I have a very unique situation where we are branching out into numerous different avenues. We're creating a group right now. Created a group right now that basically has been able to replace the police in a lot of situations by preventing crime from happening before it even results in a crime. And we've been keeping up with doing the food distribution through the community fridge network. We've also been setting up soup kitchens and protests and getting homeless people put into houses and dealing with drug abuse problems and alcoholism. And it's a lot. It's a lot of stuff. So if you want to follow some of the stuff that I do in regards to that, check out my Twitter. It's at Professor Darwin. Sometimes I post about it there. Hopefully I'll be able to post a little bit about it here and do a long form video on it. And if you want to donate or help us out with the work that we do on the streets, you can always donate to our Direct Action Fund, linked in the description box below. So anyway, that's enough about me. Let's hear a little bit about you. Tell me in the comment section down below. Jump down into the comment section below. Build some community yourself. Talk to some other anarchists and communists. See what they've done in their world to make their communities a little bit better of a place. And spread your knowledge if you have some too. And let's make the comment section down below not an incredibly toxic place, but a place that can actually help and be beneficial to the rest of the world. So anyway, with all that being said, thanks for watching. Keep evolving.